Welcome back to Crime Time Inc. Tonight, we're heading back to 1876 to a case that shocked Victorian England, the Hungerford police murders. Two officers, Inspector Joseph Druitt and PC Thomas Shorter, were killed near Hungerford, Berkshire, on December 11th, while patrolling for poachers.
Yeah. It's a case that gripped the nation, not just for the crime itself, but for the sheer brutality involved. We even have ballads from that time period that tell the story, which shows just how much it resonated with people.
So let's break down what happened. It was a dark December night, the 11th to be exact, with very little moonlight. Inspector Druitt was supposed to meet PC Shorter at Folly Crossroads. But first, he had a planned meeting with PC Golby at the Bear Hotel in Hungerford.
Right, these meetings were crucial back then. There were no radios or phones. So coordinating patrols meant physically meeting up. It makes you realize how different policing was in those days.
Golby waited at the Bear Hotel. But as time passed and Druitt didn't show, he got worried and decided to head towards Folly Crossroads, hoping to find him.
He set off up Eddington Hill towards the crossroads. It was a dark, isolated path with thick woods lining the sides. It must have been a tense walk.
And as he walked, he spotted a figure lying in the road.
At first, he thought it might be a drunkard, which wasn't uncommon back then. But as he got closer, he realized it was PC Shorter, lying in the road, brutally beaten. One source, the mysterious Shire, describes Shorter's injuries as so severe that his brains were scattered across the grass.
Oh my gosh. That's a horrifying discovery. What did Golby do next?
Well, he immediately ran back to the turnpike at the bottom of the hill and told the gatekeeper to keep watch. Then he raced back to Hungerford to raise the alarm. They arranged a cart, and by midnight, Golby, now joined by P.C. Brown from Kintbury, returned to collect Shorter's body.
They had to be concerned about Inspector Druitt at that point.
Absolutely. They took Shorter's body to the coach house of the John of Gaunt Inn in Hungerford. But knowing Druitt was still out there, they headed back to Folly Crossroads. This time they split up to cover more ground.
And then P.C. Brown found Inspector Druitt.
Yes, he was lying a short distance from the crossroads, also severely beaten. But this wasn't just a beating. Druitt had been shot in the neck at close range, and under his body they found a cap. That cap became a crucial piece of evidence.
Two murdered policemen. A scene suggesting a struggle and a mysterious cap. Where did the investigation go from there?
Their first lead came from the toll gatekeeper, who remembered seeing two men pass through earlier that night. William Day and his son-in-law, William Tidbury, both were known poachers in the area.
So poaching was a serious problem back then.
It was more than just a problem. For many, it was a means of survival. The rural poor often relied on poaching to supplement their meager diets or to earn a bit of extra money.
So Day and Tidbury were immediate suspects. What happened next?
Early the next morning, the police went to Day's cottage and arrested him. While he was having breakfast, William Tidbury and his brothers, Henry and Francis, were also arrested. By 9 a.m., all four men were in custody.
And the evidence against them started piling up quickly.
Yes, footprints found near the crime scene, in the soft soil, were matched to the footwear of the suspects. There was also blood on some of their clothing, although at the time it couldn't be conclusively determined whether it was human or animal blood.
That's a pretty big limitation. Imagine if they had today's forensic technology.
It would have been a very different investigation. But even with those limitations, they found more evidence: gun stocks and barrels hidden near where the suspects lived, one of them blood-stained.
What about that cap found under Inspector Druitt?
It was identified as belonging to Henry Tidbury, and near Shorter's body they found a broken shotgun hammer, likely the weapon used in the beating.
So a lot of physical evidence connecting the suspects to the crime scene. Anything else?
Well, they found a ferret line near Shorter's body that belonged to William Day, and a trigger plate found near Druitt's body matched one of the hidden gun stocks.
Wow, this is turning into quite a strong case against the four suspects. How did the public react to all this?
The town of Hungerford was devastated. There was a mix of mourning for the officers and fury towards the suspects. The inquest, which is a legal inquiry to determine the cause of death, had to be moved to the Corn Exchange to accommodate the massive crowds.
And when the prisoners were brought back to Hungerford for the inquest, they faced open hostility from the townsfolk. I imagine the tension in that room was palpable.
Absolutely. The inquest concluded with the jury delivering a verdict of willful murder against all four men.
Forward.
Well, not quite. The jury initially hesitated to explicitly name the prisoners as the murderers. Even though they believed they were involved, they were sent back to deliberate further before finally reaching the willful murder verdict.
Oh, I see. Sounds like they were wrestling with the gravity of the situation.
Yes, and that complexity only grew during the trial itself. which took place at Reading Assizes in February 1877.
The trial itself was quite a spectacle, wasn't it?
It drew enormous crowds. Trials were major public events back then. All four men initially pleaded not guilty. But as the trial progressed, things took an unexpected turn.
Yeah. I remember reading about William Tidbury's testimony. That must have been a dramatic moment.
It was. He confessed to lying to protect his brothers. Admitting that they had confessed the murders to him, it completely changed the course of the trial.
So he basically condemned his own brothers to save himself.
Well, his testimony painted a picture of a man torn between family loyalty and the truth. It couldn't have been an easy decision to make.
What happened after his confession?
The jury deliberated for 2 hours and reached their verdict. William Day and William Tidbury were acquitted. The jury believed William Tidbury was guilty of being an accessory after the fact. But since that charge wasn't on the indictment, he was released.
Wait, so the two men initially identified by the toll gatekeeper, against whom a lot of evidence was found, were set free?
Yes. The jury determined that while there was significant evidence against them, it wasn't enough for a murder conviction. However, Henry and Francis Tidbury weren't so lucky. They were found guilty of murdering P.C. Shorter.
What about the charge of murdering Inspector Druitt?
The jury actually recommended mercy for Francis in P.C. Shorter's murder, considering his age and the possibility that the killing wasn't premeditated. However, the judge sentenced both brothers to hang. The next day, a new jury was selected to consider the charge of murdering Inspector Druitt, but the prosecution decided not to pursue this charge against William Day and William Tidbury.
Why not? It seems strange to drop such a serious charge.
Well, they argued that presenting the same evidence to a new jury would essentially be like an appeal against the previous day's verdict. They couldn't offer any new facts, so they dropped the charge against Day and Tidbury. The charge against Henry and Francis seems to have been left unresolved, likely because their conviction for P.C. Shorter's murder already carried the death penalty.
So 2 men acquitted, 2 sentenced to death. What happened to the Tidbury brothers after the trial?
They were hanged at Reading Jail on March 12, 1877, exactly 3 months after their arrest. Despite pleas for clemency, especially for the younger brother Francis, the Home Secretary rejected them.
It's a tragic end to their story.
Yeah. Adding to the somberness, Henry Tidbury was executed on his 27th birthday.
Oh, wow. That's a somber detail. Didn't the brothers confess to the murders while they were awaiting execution?
Yes. In their written confessions, they admitted to shooting and beating the officers. They claimed they were heading home after a night of poaching and had shot 2 pheasants and a jay when they were surprised by the officers.
That detail about the jay and 2 pheasants, it's also in the ballad about the murders, isn't it? It almost makes it sound like they were just out for a bit of food, not involved in some large-scale poaching operation.
That's interesting. But it's important to remember that this detail only appears in the ballad, not in any other sources. It could be a detail added for dramatic effect, or to garner sympathy for the brothers. We shouldn't take the ballad as a completely accurate historical account.
That's a good reminder that history can be subjective, even when based on real events. So, what happened after the executions? How did the community move on from such a tragedy?
The aftermath brought a mix of sadness and a sense of justice. The community mourned their policemen but acknowledged the punishment given to the perpetrators. A public subscription raised a substantial amount of money for the widows and children of the slain officers, highlighting the community's support for their law enforcement and their compassion for the families left behind.
It's a testament to the impact these murders had on the community. It's clear these were more than just 2 policemen. They were valued members of the community.
Exactly. And the officers weren't forgotten. P.C. Golby and Superintendent Bennett, who played crucial roles in the investigation, received recognition for their efforts. Golby was even promoted to sergeant. Most importantly, 2 memorial crosses were erected near Folly Crossroads, marking the spots where Inspector Druitt and P.C. Thomas Shorter were killed.
Those crosses serve as a permanent reminder of their sacrifice. But haven't those crosses had a somewhat difficult history?
Yes, unfortunately. One of the crosses was stolen in 1995 and never found. The other was vandalized in 2002. Thankfully, they've been replaced, ensuring that the memory of these officers continues to be honored.
The Hungerford police murders are a captivating story of crime and punishment in Victorian England, reminding us of the risks law enforcement officers face and the profound impact such crimes have on communities.
And it emphasizes that even with the limited forensic tools of the time, dedicated investigators could piece together a compelling case based on observation and traditional detective work. It's also a stark reminder that behind the historical facts, there are always human stories. The victims and their families, the perpetrators and their choices. It all adds another dimension to this case.
Yeah, it really makes you think about the complexities of justice, especially in that era. We've talked about the limitations of forensic science back then, but what of the social context? Poaching was a way of life for some,
Yeah.
but it led to this brutal act.
It's a stark contrast to how we view poaching today. Back then, it was often a matter of survival for the rural poor. They relied on it for food and income. This case highlights the desperation that existed in Victorian England and the difficult choices people faced.
You can almost understand why poaching was so prevalent. But it's still hard to grasp the level of violence that erupted in this case.
Well, it's a reminder that every historical event has layers of complexity. We have the facts of the crime, the evidence, the trial, but we also have the social and economic realities of the time that played a role.
And we can't forget the ballad that arose from this case. It's a fascinating glimpse into how the public perceived these events.
Right, the ballot adds another layer to the narrative. It shows us how the case captured the public's imagination. It also reminds us that historical accounts can be influenced by popular culture and storytelling.
This case really has it all. Crime mystery, social commentary, and even a bit of folklore.
It's a reminder that history is never just about dates and names. It's about real people, their lives, their choices, and the lasting impact of those choices.
The Hungerford police murders remain a significant event in history, reminding us of the dangers faced by law enforcement, the complexities of the justice system, and the enduring power of memory.
And it prompts us to think critically about the past, to understand the context of events, and to consider the human stories behind the headlines.
This is an interesting case for our resident police historian, Tom, to discuss with his young protege, Simon, in their weekly review on Sunday. But in the meantime, tune in tomorrow for another great true crime episode.